Awesome. Yeah, it's so good seeing some familiar faces, new faces. So this is an event that is hosted by the Global Rewilding Alliance, as you probably know by now. So just to give you a quick introduction, so we are a worldwide organization that serves the global rewilding movement. So we support rewilders on every continent that are really working directly on the ground, but also building a whole ecosystem of practitioners and a community of people that are supporting nature recovery all over the world. So it's really good to have you all here. And part of it, we're like active in science policy, but also in communications, which is a really big and important part for building a movement. And so part of that is storytelling, which is going to be a focus today. So I'll let Mitch introduce our guest and topic of the day.
Thank you, Yasmin. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome, everyone. Excited to see so many faces. Today we're going to put, in these sessions, we really want to put some of our partners center stage and shine a light on some key comms topics. So this will allow us to hear from people who have some direct experience on these topics, and we will be able to ask some questions and share some insights, perhaps create some debate. As we might have mentioned already, we want to try and keep these sessions engaging, so feel free to write up any questions in the chat, and then at the end, when we have the Q&A, we will either hand over the mic to you or read it out for you. All of these sessions are recorded, as May mentioned. We have a previous session from ARC Rewilding with Jeroen Helmer about the power of illustrations, and you can find that on YouTube if it interests you. Today's topic is one that I think we all adore at the Global Rewilding Alliance: storytelling. I mean, most people care about the environment, but they're not career environmentalists. They might not feel able to act, or perhaps they don't know where to start. So the question is, how do we reach them? And we think the answer is storytelling. So in this session, Robert Langkjær-Bain, joint editor at Imagine 5, will share insights from their work using human-centered storytelling to make environmental action feel more relevant and possible for a target audience. Imagine 5 is a storytelling platform that inspires a greener life, but I'm sure Robert will tell you much more about it. So without further ado, here's Robert.
Thank you very much, Mitch. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you to the Global Rewilding Alliance, and welcome everybody who's joined today. Great to see so many people here. Some names I know and some names I don't know. Thank you for being here. I'm going to talk a little bit today about what we do at Imagine 5, about the audience, who we target and why, and how we get through to them. And I'm going to share some examples of our work and some insights that hopefully you'll find useful in your work communicating about rewilding. I'll start by telling you a bit about Imagine 5 and what we do, because that's the way that we sort of approach this sort of thing, and the way that we think about it is quite central, I think, to this question of engaging new audiences with rewilding. So like Mitch said in his introduction, we are an environmental storytelling platform. We're a non-profit. We exist to inspire people to live greener lives, and we do that by telling stories, inspiring stories, constructive stories, beautiful stories about the things people can do to make a difference for the planet, and about the things that other people out there are already doing. We've been going for about 5 years. We publish at imagine5.com. We have more than 250,000 followers now on Instagram. We're also on Facebook and YouTube, and we publish this annual print magazine, or maybe in the future actually more frequently than annual print magazine, which you can see in the picture here. And we talk about all aspects of climate solutions, very often from the point of view of the audience. It's about what they can do in their own lives, and it's about examples of other people doing cool things. We promise always no doom and gloom. We try to focus on solutions instead of talking about problems. Of course, there's lots of important environmental stories about what's going wrong, but we feel like that's covered elsewhere, and we're trying to add something on top of that. We're trying to reach people who wouldn't necessarily choose to read about environmental stories just because that was an interest of theirs. So we're trying to make it very appealing to people. We're trying to make it emotional, beautiful, personal, relevant. And we also use a lot of culture stories to try and sort of talk about climate without talking about climate, if you like. So we'll tell a story that might be about music or movies or food or fashion or something like that, to draw people in and then give them a climate angle. One recent example of that was that we did an interview with the climber Alex Honnold, who you might know from a documentary called Free Solo. This is the guy who climbed up El Capitan in California without any ropes. Super fascinating character. And he also, alongside that, runs a solar power charity non-profit that provides solar power to places that don't have good energy access. He's been giving away 1/3 of his income to that foundation for many years now. So he's quite a committed climate activist, as well as just being a fascinating cultural character. And he's just the sort of character who we're kind of always looking for. We also use a lot of photography in what we do. This is a photo of Madam Gandhi, the musician, who is our latest cover star on our latest issue of the magazine. And photography and design is something that's very important to us, to kind of reach out to people, to create an emotional connection with people, to create something that's beautiful, and then to get the climate messages through that. In Madam Gandhi's example, she's quite an outspoken climate activist, and she's actually been sampling the sound of glaciers and the sound of penguins and things like that into her music to kind of bring these environmental messages through what she does. So that's a little bit about who Imagine 5 is. And engaging new audiences is kind of baked into our whole strategy and our whole way of thinking about the world. I guess Imagine 5 as an organization is probably very different to the organizations that people listening right now are working for. We're not trying to sort of promote a specific message or a specific project. We're more about getting people to engage with all sorts of environmental topics and conversations in kind of any way we can. So there's a lot of stuff that we have the freedom to do that might be more difficult for you to do if you have different aims or different limitations. But I certainly think that there's plenty in what we do and what we've achieved which can be useful and inspiring for you guys, and that's what I want to share today. I'm going to talk a little bit about our audience as well, the audience that we try to target. The way that we describe them, we call them the willing and able. And by that we mean, when we say willing, we're talking about people who are concerned about the environment and want to do more to help. And that's actually most people, even though it doesn't seem it all the time. There is actually a strong majority of people all over the world who want to see stronger climate action, who want to do more, who are really concerned about this issue. In pretty much every country, there's a giant UN survey on this that they've been repeating every year or so, and it's big majorities pretty much everywhere. So that's one of the things that we keep in mind. So most people are willing. And then when we talk about the able, what we mean by that is people in relatively wealthy countries who have the opportunity and the freedom and also have a responsibility to reduce their environmental footprint because they have a relatively large environmental footprint. They have a chance to make a difference and they want to. So that's the audience who we're going for, and that is a big audience. So our strategy is all about reaching out to people who are beyond. They're not just in the environmental bubble. They're not climate nerds. They're not wildlife nerds. It's a much bigger group of people than that. That's where we see there being an opportunity to really make a difference and kind of shift the conversation. So let's zoom in a little bit on our content and the kind of stories that we tell. Rewilding is, of course, just one of many areas that we cover, because we talk about all sorts of different things. It is something that we've come back to a number of times. We wouldn't call ourselves rewilding experts, but it's one of the topics that we have ended up talking about quite a lot. And I really think that rewilding is, it just really lends itself to storytelling. Even just that word rewilding, I think, is very powerful for people, much more so than things like conservation or biodiversity, which I don't think are really words that really capture the imagination in the same way that rewilding does. So that's really a gift, I think, to all of us that work in communicating this. That rewilding is it's just a great story. You know, it kind of it tells itself a lot of the way, and then you just have to build on that. People want to hear these stories, so that's great. Here are a few examples of things that we've done, things you can do to make the world wilder. That was one of the first pieces we probably did about rewilding, and obviously the angle there is that it's giving people tips for things that they can do. It's looking at the topic from the audience's point of view and making it very relatable. The one in the middle, why this place is special, Swedish Lapland. That was part of a series that we did looking at people working at rewilding sites, people working on tourism actually at rewilding sites, running tours and whatnot in beautiful places. And we did these interviews with them with lots of kind of direct quotes from people who just love these places, and you feel their passion for it. And we found some great photos like you can see there to bring these places to life. And then the third one, the lost wildlife making a comeback. That's a kind of a classic rewilding story, I think, where it was sort of capturing the drama of of wildlife coming back, and of course some brilliant photography. We worked with Rewilding Europe on all three of these stories, and they've been very generous with giving us access to their wonderful photo library. So that was a real help in sort of using the imagery to bring this to life. So for me, the sort of learnings from these three particular pieces, sort of with the first one, making it about the reader, with the second one, finding a hero and giving it a face, and with the third one, finding the drama in rewilding stories. Okay, so this is a spread from the first magazine that we published. And this is, again, a photo that Rewilding Europe gave us access to, which really just captures the drama of rewilding and the beauty, I guess. So yeah, it's just brilliant stuff to be able to give to our readers. It's a brilliant story to be able to tell. So this is another example of a recent story that we've done. This one was with a foundation here in Denmark called the Hempel Foundation. We have some people from the Hempel Foundation on the call today, I think. And this is about a project that they are running in the south of Denmark called Saxfjell Wilderness. And this is one of the sites where these Taurus cattle have been introduced, which are these cattle that have been specially bred to mimic extinct aurochs that used to roam Europe, these sort of very large herbivores with horns that are now long extinct. And these cattle have been bred to sort of fill the gap in the ecosystem left by aurochs. And we've got this wonderful photo and a kind of strong headline telling that story. This was a really successful piece. We shared this on social media as well, and it's been one of the most successful posts that we've done on social media. Reached more than 1 million people in the end. And I think this is testament to the strength of rewilding as a story, because I mean, I think we executed this story well, but I have to say, I don't think we did anything terribly clever or original with it. We just picked a great photo, wrote a great headline, and off it goes. So it's just a great example of the strength of rewilding as a narrative, I think, and the drama that it brings. Yeah, so let's talk about engaging new audiences with this topic then. Earlier on, we talked about the number of people who are concerned about climate change and how that's a big majority everywhere you look. But the picture is a bit more complicated than that, because then within that large number of people who are concerned, not everybody is necessarily engaged with the topic, not everybody is necessarily talking about it. And this is a good example of that. Okay, great. So this is a map of the US based on asking people the question, are you worried about climate change? And if you look at the scale on the right there, you'll see that the deeper red a state is, the more people said yes, and the more blue it is, the more they said no. So what this is basically telling us is that most people are quite worried. The national average is 63%, and there's only a couple of states where it's below 50%. But look what happens when you change the question from "Are you worried about climate change?" to "Do you ever talk about climate change?" The number of people who say that they talk about climate change at least occasionally is only 36%, and so suddenly the country is all blue. And this is, I'm always showing these two maps to people to make the point that yes, a very large number of people are concerned about it, but it's not really normal in the US, in this example, to be talking about it a lot. And I'm sure it's going to be a similar picture in a lot of other countries as well. And that also goes for taking action about climate change. If people aren't talking to each other about it, then that makes it harder for them to do stuff. It means that politicians don't know that that's what people want. It means that businesses don't know that that's what people want. So that's the challenge that we're trying to solve. We're trying to move the number of people who are talking and doing stuff on climate up to the level of the number of people who are thinking about it all the time. Another way of thinking about this is to break down the population into different groups based on how engaged they are with the question of climate. So one way of looking at this is if you have a group of 6 people, you're probably going to have one of them who is very engaged with environmental stuff. Maybe they work in that area, maybe they volunteer, maybe they're voting for green parties. They're on board, that's great. As environmental communicators, they don't really need our help. We can produce stuff that they would like, we can engage with them, that's cool, but we don't need to persuade them to do more because they're already doing it. At the other end of the scale, you've got about 1 in 6 people who thinks it's all nonsense, maybe thinks it's not happening at all, or maybe thinks that humans aren't causing it, or that it's too late for us to do anything, blah, 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 doesn't trust anything you say. And so those people are very difficult to get through to, and it's a lot of wasted effort that goes into those people because they're probably never going to come around. So if you remove both of those two extremes, the people who don't need your help because they're already on board, and the people who are never going to come on board and it's not worth your effort because just life isn't long enough, then you're left with about 4 out of 6 people, about 2/3 of the population. This is very broad brush strokes, but it's based on survey data from a few different countries where you see roughly the same picture. So round about 2/3 of people who are persuadable, who you can bring around. So they are concerned, they do care, they're not denying that it's happening, and they're just at various stages on that journey of how much they're thinking about it, whether they're taking any action, whether they're talking about it. So that to me is a useful way to think about the population. If you take out the deniers and you take out the people who are already on board, you've still got 2 out of every 3 people you meet who are persuadable, who are worthwhile targets for environmental communication, including the kind of stuff that you guys do. So that's a really important thing that we keep in mind. One of the ways that we think about this at Imagine 5 when we're coming up with story ideas is to ask the question of, is this story a dark green story or a light green story? And what we mean by that, these aren't terms that we use kind of in an audience-facing way. We don't talk about this kind of publicly, but when we're discussing stories in the office, we'll very often be saying to ourselves, is it a dark green story or a light green story? And dark green obviously means, it's a hardcore environmental story. It's probably got some jargon in. Maybe it's quite demanding in terms of what the audience has to know, or maybe it's asking them to be on board with a particular political viewpoint. Whereas a light green story is just much easier. This is a really important way, I think, to think about environmental communication. We try and be as light green as we can. Sometimes we do want to tell those dark green stories, and that's going to be for a narrower audience. It's going to be for a more sort of dedicated environmentalist audience. It's not going to be something that is going to reach beyond that bubble, but we try wherever we can to be as light green as we can, because that's where we feel that the value is. Okay, so a few tips that I've got for achieving that then, for reaching as broad as we can beyond the bubble and getting to as many of these potential people as we can. The first is to meet people where they are, meet your audience where they are, not where you wish they were. Whoever your audience is, and the answer to that question will, I'm sure, be different for everybody who's on this call. But you probably wish that they knew more about what you're doing, that they understood more about rewilding. You probably wish that they cared more about rewilding, that they were more aligned with you politically, with like the policy changes that you'd like to see, for example, or that would benefit your work. You probably wish that they agreed with you about more things, that they paid more attention. We can all wish those things, but you also have to understand just where your audience is and accept that and just go with that. And I think with one of the challenges that you have with rewilding is that it is something which has kind of captured people's imagination. You know, it's this word which has taken off and which you hear a lot these days. I was looking earlier on at Google searches for the word rewilding over the past 10 years, if you go onto Google Trends, and it's quite striking to see how that graph goes up sharply from left to right over the past decade or so. You know, it's captured people's imagination, and that's always a double-edged sword, because yes, people are paying attention, but are they understanding? And you start seeing the word rewilding applied in ways that that you might think, oh well, that's not really what it means, or they haven't really understood what's at the heart of it. And my advice in these situations would just be always try and meet people where they are. Try and meet people at the level of understanding that they have. And remember that if they're engaging with you at all, and if they're showing an interest in rewilding at all, then that's a huge gift that we need to work with. And I think it's important not to sort of end up being in the position of the person saying, but you don't understand, you're doing it wrong, you don't understand it quite right. You need to sort of, it's like an improvisation where people say that you can't, in sort of improvised theatre, you can never say no, you always have to say yes and. So try and always be in that mindset of saying yes and. If the audience doesn't quite understand something about rewilding, or if there's something they don't know, or if they're not quite on board with where you're trying to get them, just always just respect that and try and bring them along, meet people where they are. So that's super important. One of the ways that you can do that is through the language that you use. In environmental communication, there's a lot of jargon, there's a lot of language that people don't know, or that lands in a way that might be different from what you expect. Right now, for example, we have COP30 going on. A lot of people don't know what COP is. A majority of people, the last time this was surveyed, which was in 2021, so 4 years ago, the vast majority of people in the US couldn't tell you what COP was. It happened in the UK that year. It happened in Glasgow. 2/3 of people couldn't tell you what COP was. So that's just an interesting reminder that those sorts of words like COP are not well understood by everybody, and it's really worth spelling them out and explaining them to people. Another really interesting one is net zero, which is a term that's used very widely, particularly in the UK, I think, to talk about reducing carbon emissions. There's some fascinating surveys looking at what happens if you ask people whether they support net zero, and then you ask people whether they support balancing the amount of carbon that's emitted into the atmosphere with the amount that's removed, which is the same thing. But if you spell it out to people, then it's harder for people to disagree. Then they go, yeah, well, of course I'm in favor of that. How could you not be in favor of that? You have a much stronger majority of people who are in favor with balancing the carbon you emit with the carbon that you take out of the atmosphere than you do with net zero, because net zero has just become, first of all, it's not understood, and it's not trusted, and it's become tainted. It's become this political football. So if you ask people about net zero, a lot of people will say, no. But if you ask them, if you spell it out for them, then suddenly a lot more people are on board. And there's quite a lot of evidence showing that. So those are both, I think COP and net zero are both examples of terms. It's not that you should never use them, but that need to be used quite carefully. And there'll be examples in the world of rewilding as well. Words like biodiversity. Do your audience understand A, what biodiversity is, or B, why it matters? The question of why biodiversity matters, I think is quite unexplained for a lot of people, quite underexplained, I should say. There's often an assumption in these communications that people understand what that means or why they should care. And actually, I think we should see it as part of our job to help people with that and to explain it for them. Another principle that I think is really useful to keep in mind when working on this stuff is show, don't tell. So when you have a point that you want to get across to people, something that you want people to support, it's very useful to try to show them the way to the conclusion that you want them to reach, instead of just telling them what you think. And sometimes this means avoiding jargon. We've looked at topics, for example, recently, like environmental justice, ecofeminism, lots of these kind of long words that you use to talk about complicated topics. The circular economy is another one. We shouldn't be just going out there telling people that the circular economy is important or ecofeminism is important. We should be leading them there. We should be showing them examples of, here's a person and here's the life they lead, and here's a woman in a country in Africa who has a difficult life, and climate change is going to have a much bigger effect on her than it's going to have on the average man in this country, and here's why. And you talk through it and you bring that to life for people. So show, don't tell. Don't assume that people understand the long words that you're using. Don't assume that people are on board with your political priorities. Walk them through it and lead them to the conclusions that you want them to get to. The next thing I want to talk about is the faces that we use to tell our stories, and the examples that we use to tell our stories, and the people that we put at the forefront of these stories. One important question here is, who is trusted as a communicator? If you look at evidence of who people trust with environmental messages, one of the people who comes out top is David Attenborough. There was a great survey in the UK where they gave people a list of different people who communicate about the environment, and they said, who do you trust and who do you not trust? David Attenborough did extremely well. Organizations like WWF did quite well. And then down at the bottom, you have people like Greta Thunberg, Extinction Rebellion, those sorts of people, hardcore, provocative activists who, don't mind breaking the law, who don't mind causing disruption. They have very low levels of trust. This is no judgment on those people. This isn't about what I think about those people or what you think about them. It's just to say that if you're trying to reach a mainstream audience in the UK, in that example, then you have to realize that most people don't trust them. But they do trust David Attenborough. And why is that? Why do people trust David Attenborough? Well, I think it's because, he's a nice guy. He's like everybody's granddad, and he's a great communicator. But he's also on the TV all the time, and he's a pop culture figure. He's more than just a scientist. He's more than just a naturalist. He's a national treasure. And people invite him into their living rooms, and they love that about him. He's much more of he's as much a cultural figure as he is a naturalist or a science communicator. And that's what we always have in mind when we're looking for faces for our stories. And that's why we do stories all the time with actors, musicians, footballers, all sorts of different people like that who our audience are already interested in. I'll give you a few examples of the kind of faces that we've chosen for our stories that we felt like got across to people really well, and why we worked with them. One is Alex Honnold, who I mentioned earlier, the climber. So he's a famous sports person, and he's been in this incredible film where you see him climb this sheer mountain face with no ropes. He's already a character that's out there and has grabbed people's imagination, and he has a lot of environmental credibility. So he was a really powerful one for us. Athletes generally, I think are great if you can work with them, because not only do people like them and care about them, but they also have credibility to talk about the environment, especially if they're doing outdoorsy stuff. because they tend to be very connected to nature. They tend to, they're outdoors a lot. So they can be brilliant communicators to work with. We've worked recently with the author Amitav Ghosh, who's written novels about climate. You may have heard of the eco drag queen Patagonia. If you haven't, then do Google Patagonia and check out her Instagram profile. She's fantastic. Goes around in drag in the American outdoors and advocates for getting outside and caring for the environment in these crazy outfits. And it's just, you know, full of energy and character. And there's a really unexpected character to be an advocate for this stuff. We're always looking for people who are a little bit unexpected. I think it's very useful sometimes to imagine what you think an environmentalist looks like, and almost look for the opposite of that. Almost think, well, what would be something completely different for that? And then see if you can find that. And you won't always be able to find that person, but the closer you can get, the better, I think, because that shows people the breadth of this movement. It shows people that it's normal for everybody to talk and take action on this. We did a great story recently with a regenerative farmer in Georgia in the US. Who, you know, wears a cowboy hat and looks like a cowboy, and we've got him sitting there on his front porch at his farm, and he just doesn't look like you would expect an environmentalist to look at all. And that was really powerful for us, and that was exactly why we wanted to interview and photograph him, because we thought, well, this is not a face that people, this is not a voice that people have heard before. It's not a story that people will have heard before, and it's not a face that people will expect fronting a rewilding story. So we found that to be really powerful. And you can do this in the world of rewilding as well. So when you're picking the kind of protagonists of your stories, you know, look for those people who have that character, who maybe are a little unexpected, who maybe don't look like you expect a rewilding person to look, and also look beyond the obvious spokespeople for the work that you're doing. You know, it doesn't have to be people working for your organizations. It can also be members of the public who are engaging with you, who you might be able to tell stories around, you know, interview, or have them appear in a video, or have them produce something, whatever it might be. If it's tourism related, then it could be people who've been on trips. So it's good to have those people who can speak independently and speak from the heart about this work, so that it doesn't just feel like they're doing it for a living. Yeah, so I think that question of who we have fronting our stories and the faces that we use is really powerful. Try to look for those folks who are a little bit unexpected, or who your audience have already fallen in love with because they're pop culture figures.
Brilliant, Robert. I've personally enjoyed it, and I'm sure everyone here has. It's really interesting to hear about the work you do at Imagine 5, because I think it's quite unique. Perhaps it's because I don't know of other media who talk about nature in the way that you do, but I do see it as quite unique, having this portraying of mainstream people, and also talking about climate, as you say, without talking about climate necessarily. And I like what you say, this last thought about talking about rewilding by kind of portraying people within the rewilding movement who don't necessarily look like the obvious portrait of an environmentalist. And the first question that I had about that, and then I'll open the floor for everyone's question, was, you know, I feel like actually within every rewilder there is a part of a person who is not really an environmentalist. You know, no one is, of course, 100% a nature person. There are other nuances and aspects and hobbies and tastes. And this has been really inspiring me to think, what if we could portray rewilding wilders by asking them to actually speak about something else that they like, and perhaps even in terms of the visual, portraying them in an environment that is not nature, because I think this is something that we do a lot in nature communication, is showing people planting a tree or showing people on the field. And what I've found really refreshing in your communication is that, yeah, as you said, you don't necessarily show people doing the obvious nature work, but it ties together. So I was wondering if you would think that it's also kind of a nice approach to think about our rewilders in kind of different environment and nature.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I mean, that's something that we do quite a lot, is that we try to take people out of the sort of settings that you've seen them in before. We try not to. It's easy to fall back on photographing every interviewee in with greenery and trees behind them. That would sort of be the sort of obvious thing to do for a lot of our content. So we deliberately try to avoid that sort of thing. When we interviewed Alex Honnold, the climber, for instance, we took all the photos in his home, and it was pictures of him with his kids. And so it was just a different side of him than you'd seen before. It was a different way into the story, because it was more about, it felt more personal, it felt more vulnerable. It just leads you in a whole different direction. So yeah, I would say I think that sort of thing is probably easier for Imagine 5 than it is for most of you guys, because we've just got a little bit more freedom to play around with that sort of thing. If you're trying to specifically tell stories about a particular rewilding project or whatever it is, then that's a little bit harder. But I definitely think that you can mix it up with taking people out of the settings that you would expect them to see in, or the settings that you've seen those people in, lots of times already. And yeah, showing them as more rounded people, showing them in a context that's more unexpected, and yeah, letting the audience know that they're just people like them. I mean, some people you may have a lot of people who are in your potential audience who don't really see themselves as outdoorsy people, and who don't have the right clothes, and they don't feel like they're quite qualified to be in that gang, So then when they see these, someone out there with their binoculars and with their boots on, looking quite hardcore, they might just think, well, that person looks impressive, but it's not me, So that's something to be cautious of. And I think that's a good idea. I mean, you're going to have to. It's going to be a balance. You'd have to mix it up. But I think it's a good idea to, at least sometimes take those people out of the obvious nature setting and see them somewhere else. Yeah.
Yeah, could be a way to make them more relatable, as you said, not always wearing the outdoorsy outfit, but sometimes being, talking about their favorite movie, or talking about what they do on the weekend when they are not outdoors. So yeah, very interesting possibility.
I think when you show a picture of somebody looking really cool, whether it's like a rewilding person, being outdoorsy, or whether it's like a singer looking really cool, or whatever it might be, like you have to sort of think about how that lands, and is someone looking at it and thinking, wow, that person looks really cool, or are they thinking, wow, that person looks really cool, I'm never going to be them, they're nothing like me, like I can't possibly ever be like them. And it depends who you're trying to reach, and it depends what you're trying to achieve, but just have that in mind. If you want your audience to put themselves in those shoes, then yeah, maybe you do need to show people in a different way.
We have a question from John Conradi. Would you like to ask the question yourself, John? Would you like to unmute yourself?
Thank you. You talked about jargon. I just was wondering about the word rewilding and the concept of rewilding itself in this wider group of the willing and able. Has it sort of hit a threshold where we can just assume people know it, or do you think we very much have to start from very much basics?
Good question. I was thinking this before I came on, and realizing that I didn't have a good answer to it. I mean, luckily, I think it's one of those words that kind of does what it says on the tin. I think you can understand what it is, even if you're hearing it for the first time. whether or not you understand the ins and outs of like how it works or who's doing it or what the what the sort of story of that movement is or how it fits in with more traditional conservation is another question. So I think it does need a bit of explaining to people, the definition of rewilding versus conservation, or to do with what sort of scale it's happening at, or what the difference is between rewilding a huge area of the mountains of Italy to rewilding your windowsill or something like that. I think it does need some explaining, but I think luckily it is one of those words that people do get, and I think there's probably been sufficient media coverage of it, sufficient discussion around it, that people are at least aware that it's a thing. I think I don't have data on that, but that's my impression, and so I think that's something that we need to pick up and run with.
We have Jean-Marie Mad saying both in the US and Ireland, even in the UK, 90% of the people who don't know about rewilding resonate with the sound of it. I think we've all experienced that, of rewilding being this kind of magic word that really gets people engaged, and they see that there is something active and something future looking.
Yeah, so even if they don't know what it is already, then they hear it and they go, "Ooh, what's that?" So yeah, that's great.
Yeah, as you say, compared to the terminology, the word conservation, rewilding has a bit more of an active term. Nitch, I see that you have a question. Would you like to ask it?
Sure. Yeah. Right at the beginning, at the beginning of the presentation, you mentioned like the drama of rewilding, in that sense of just how, in the sense of also its beauty, its appeal. I was just wondering, how does that drama fit in with trying to persuade someone of how good it is? Is that not a potential conflict there?
How do you mean when you say conflict? Why would it be a conflict?
Like in the sense that, let's say I'm on the fence, or I don't really know what rewilding is, and then somebody says, well, it's lovely, but it has this drama essence to it.
Well, yeah, it's also controversial. Yeah, it's also controversial in for different reasons in a lot of different places. The question of kind of large predators and so on, particularly. So the drama isn't always positive, but I think the fact that just people find it exciting, I think just gives you an opportunity. People are listening, people are excited and they want to hear. So I think you just have to take it from there. And in some cases there is negativity, and you have to navigate that. But even in those cases, I think it's you've got people listening. So that's much better than people just not even hearing or caring what you're saying. I mean, in the content that I mentioned the content that we've done recently with Hempel Foundation about the Taurus cattle here in Denmark. And we had some beautiful photography, and we've got some fantastic video of some of Hempel's people, getting excited about seeing these animals for the first time and that sort of thing. And of course, anybody who knows a little bit about these projects knows that it's much more complicated than just that species, and we shouldn't just get too excited about that species, because it's about the whole ecosystem and blah blah blah, and it's there's a lot of nuance, and there's a lot more to say, but still, you've got, on the other hand, you've got these like ancient beasts that have been brought back to life, and that's just people just love that. So you have to not sort of turn down that gift that you've been given of these wonderful stories. You just have to use that as an opportunity to then take people into the nuance. Because if you led with the nuance, nobody would listen, and then we wouldn't be anywhere. But if you lead with the nobody's seen anything like this in Europe since the 1600s, then people listen, and then at least you have a chance to get to the new ones. That's how I would look at it.
Brilliant, thank you.
Amazing. Bhupati, would you like to ask your question?
Hi. Can you hear me, Robert?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is my realization that I've been working with rewilders in South India, and for a while I couldn't get hold of rewild till what. So then I read few books of natural history. I think rewilding as a communication, then we have to tell them how it was, the wild was. So I think natural history books, this is my realization that we have to shift from human history to natural history, and there should be more texts. For each village, there should be a book on how the village used to be. So I think the more stress is outside communication to create a system of knowledge, or this is something I realized. But what is your experience and thoughts?
Yeah, so it sounds like you're talking about the idea of like the shifting baseline of what people expect from nature. Like people don't know how the wild was in the past, so they don't know how depleted it is today. That's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's super important. That's something that we've been discussing recently as well. Ways that we could help to get that message across. And of course, there's a different story about that in every place that you could visit. Yeah, I suppose I would say that if you're trying to communicate that, then think about doing it in ways that would be very simple and accessible to people, and that people would find easy to access and understand, or that would grab people's attention, and that they would share with each other. Of course, that sort of thing is going to be documented at a scientific level, you'd hope, as well. But I think the important thing there would be to bring it to life. Can you bring it to life visually, with visual comparisons, or with concrete examples of how a place used to look? Is there something that you could turn into a photography project, or an illustration? In the last session there was a discussion about illustration for rewilding. So that might be a way into it. Yeah, I think it's a super important message, and yeah, just one that needs to be brought to life in a kind of simple and powerful way.
Perfect. Thank you, Robert. We'll take one last question. We have a hand. Someone rose a hand. I think it's Elpida. Would you like to ask a question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi from Greece, by the way. I wanted to ask a question because I am a biologist and I am trying to do my part in conservation by making videos about animals. But I also happen to work at a fashion company, and I see how easier it is to convince people to buy this and that in order to look like a fashion model, because we're saying about how intimidating and naturalist may look like if they dress the part. And I'm wondering, how can we convince people that it's not that intimidating and maybe it's a lifestyle you can follow, and why it's so much easier in other sectors like fashion and not in conservation and biology in general? If you have any data on that, what it is so intimidating about that?
When you say intimidating, you think, what is it that you're saying is intimidating? The idea of kind of getting outdoors and being with nature?
Yeah, for the mainstream audience, and I can understand that 100%. And I'm wondering, maybe it's because fashion provides with an easy solution. You just buy the stuff and you get closer to look like the fashion model, while in conservation, you have to go outside and do something. How maybe we can make it easier for people? I don't know, just wondering.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's that question is really at the heart of what we do at Imagine 5. That's the kind of problem that we're trying to solve all the time. Yeah, like people overconsume because they like cool clothes and they like buying cheap stuff, and You know, it's at least for a moment that it makes them feel good, and that's, you know, that's obviously a big cultural challenge that all of us in the environmental world are trying to work on. How can we make a difference? Well, you know, try and adopt the tools of fashion. Try and do what they're doing. You know, when we show people talking about climate and environmental topics, we make them look great. Or we tell stories about sustainable fashion. You know, we show how it can be done in a more sustainable way. You know, Patagonia, who I mentioned earlier, the sort of climate drag queen. You know, she's one of the masters of this sort of thing, of combining fashion with a love for the outdoors and showing that it doesn't have to be one or the other.
It was a response to that final question, basically, about, I think I was kind of understanding some of the issues with it. It's obviously people see these big conservation projects, but they find it hard to actually like think, how can I make a difference? Like, I'm not going to buy a bison and throw it in the woods. That's very difficult for a single person to do. But obviously you can do things like our gardens and our back gardens in the UK. All of the individual back gardens that we have actually are larger than all of the natural reserves that we have in the UK put together. So if we make these smaller changes, like just slowly giving spaces for hedgehogs and having some rewild areas of the garden, we can sort of imitate what other conservationists are doing, but in a very real way. In the same way that you see someone wear a cool hat, you can like, I can get that cool hat. In the very same way, you know, you can make very small changes in your life and rewild your own garden. There's lots of materials out there to sort of get involved in that sense and to encourage other people to do it. And that's one of the things that we do at Wildwood. I work for Wildwood Trust, by the way. Is encourage people to make their own sort of small steps, and then that's to a big change.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, sounds good. I mean, one of the things that I'm always thinking is it's important never to give people the impression that they're not qualified to be in this conversation, or that they're not sort of perfect enough or not knowledgeable enough to be in the conversation. So I think it's really important to try and give readers something they can do. Yeah, they're not gonna buy a huge tract of land and rewild it. It's never gonna happen. But what can they do in their lives that could make a difference? Who else can they support? What can they do in their back garden, etc.? Just making people feel like, you know, you're valued, your contribution makes a difference. However much you know, however engaged you are, you know, we're glad to have you here. That's the vibe we're always trying to give to people. We're very careful never to sort of send out vibes of, you're not good enough for this conversation, we're better than you need to listen to us, kind of thing. That's kind of a big no-no for us.
Love it. I've got a whole heap of takeaways for us personally at the GRA. Anyway, it was sort of felt like a learning session for us, our team, as well as inviting everyone in. So huge thanks, Robert. That was really great.
We want to finish on time. I think you have been answering these questions brilliantly. We've learned so much. I'll let Yasmin close the call.
Yes, thank you. Well, that was brilliant. We definitely have a lot of notes, and our brain will be buzzing with new way of looking at it. I feel like that's like a thing that you're bringing is just kind of this new creative way that we can share similar story, but yeah, in a way that can be a lot more impactful. So thank you so much, Robert. For everyone, yeah, I think if you know, we hope that you leave the call and just kind of start seeing your surrounding, maybe the people around you, your story with a slightly different pair of eyes, and that's gonna bring some interesting thoughts and story along. So that is yeah, that's our hope, and that was really good. Thank you so much, Robert, and we'll for sure keep following Imagine 5 stories for more inspiration. But yeah, thank you, and thank you everyone for joining. Now we'll have another one of those calls in probably in the new year. Wow. So yeah, just stay Stay tuned.